Waitress slipped a note to the billionaire. Your fiancé set a trap. Leave now. In the middle of this organized chaos stood a restaurant known for its elegance, its quiet sophistication a sharp contrast to the noisy streets outside. This was the kind of place where the walls seemed to whisper stories of success, power, and secrets behind closed doors. And tonight, it was about to witness one of those stories. James Ellsworth stepped out of his sleek black car, adjusting the cuff of his tailored suit as he glanced at the towering glass building of the restaurant. At 42, James was the kind of man who drew attention without even trying. His presence was commanding yet subtle, like a calm storm waiting just beneath the surface. The world knew him as a tech billionaire, a man whose ideas had shaped industries, but only a few knew him personally. He had wealth, influence, and a life filled with privilege, but he also carried a quiet awareness that not everyone in his circle could be trusted. Tonight, however, James wasn't here for business. He had agreed to dinner with Vanessa, his fiancée, a woman whose beauty and charm were often the topic of whispered conversations in elite circles. Vanessa was elegant, confident, and seemingly devoted, her laughter bright and her smile practiced to perfection. To the world, they were a power couple, two people whose lives seemed perfectly aligned. But James had always learned to trust his instincts, and lately, a faint unease had settled over him. Something about Vanessa felt off, though he couldn't put his finger on it. The maitre d' greeted them with a warm, professional smile, guiding them to a secluded corner table by the window. The view overlooked the city skyline, a canvas of lights twinkling like distant stars. James nodded politely, and Vanessa took the lead, chatting with ease as if she belonged in this world of luxury and refinement. Her voice was soft but commanding, filling the space without effort. Emily, a young waitress with sharp eyes and a quiet demeanor, approached their table with a notepad in hand. She had worked at the restaurant for just over a year, but she had developed a keen sense for reading people. She could tell a regular from a first-time visitor at a glance, and she often noticed the subtle interactions that went unnoticed by others. Tonight, as she prepared to serve James and Vanessa, she couldn't help but notice the tension in the air, something that seemed out of place amid the polite smiles and casual conversation. As Emily poured water into their glasses, she observed the small gestures. Vanessa's fingers trembled ever so slightly when she reached for her wine glass, and her eyes darted repeatedly toward the entrance, as if expecting someone. James, on the other hand, sat with a calm posture, his hands folded neatly on the table, his eyes scanning the room with a subtle vigilance. He was polite and attentive, engaging Vanessa in conversation, yet there was an invisible barrier between them, a tension Emily could sense without understanding fully. The dinner began with the usual pleasantries. James complimented the chef on a new dish he had tried previously, and Vanessa responded with laughter that sounded perfectly timed, yet lacked genuine warmth. Emily moved between tables, offering service with a smile, but she found herself glancing at James and Vanessa repeatedly. Something about Vanessa's behavior nagged at her. She wasn't sure what it was, but her instincts told her to pay attention. As the evening progressed, Emily noticed subtle signals that seemed to confirm her suspicion. Vanessa's hand kept brushing against the edge of the table, tapping lightly as she texted someone under the table. Her conversation with James seemed rehearsed, a careful balance of charm and distraction. Every now and then, she would give a small, almost imperceptible nod toward a waiter who was stationed near the kitchen. Emily's curiosity grew, but so did her unease. There was a quiet sense of danger she couldn't ignore, a feeling that something in this carefully curated scene was not as it appeared. Meanwhile, James tried to focus on Vanessa, maintaining a polite conversation while his mind raced. He had learned over the years to notice the small inconsistencies, the tiny cracks in people's behavior that revealed their true intentions. He noticed how Vanessa avoided his gaze at certain moments, how her smile never reached her eyes when she spoke of personal matters, and how she subtly shifted the conversation away from topics he found important. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone else, but to James, trained to read such nuances, it was enough to raise a quiet alarm. Emily's heart beat faster as she prepared to leave the table for a moment. She had debated whether she should intervene, whether she had any right to intrude in the lives of someone so powerful. But a thought lingered in her mind. What if James was in danger? She couldn't explain why, only that her instincts screamed that something wasn't right. For years, she had been trained to read situations, to notice patterns in behavior, and tonight, every instinct told her to act. As she approached with a fresh bottle of wine, she caught Vanessa's brief, almost imperceptible glance toward the door. It was a signal, subtle and quick, yet unmistakable to someone paying attention. Emily's heart raced. She couldn't let this night pass without doing something, even if it meant putting herself in an uncomfortable position. Carefully, she folded a small piece of paper, and while pretending to adjust the silverware, slipped it onto James's table. It was folded neatly, inconspicuous, just another part of the dining setting to anyone who wasn't paying attention. James noticed it immediately, the subtle placement of the paper catching his eye. He hesitated for a moment, then unfolded it with careful hands. The words inside were simple, yet they carried weight beyond what Emily could have imagined. Your fiancé set a trap. Leave now. For a brief second, James froze. The words seemed almost unreal, impossible in their simplicity yet terrifying in implication. He looked up at Emily, who offered him a small, almost apologetic nod, as if to say she knew nothing further but hoped he understood. His mind raced, considering the possibilities, the motives, and the risks. This was no longer a simple dinner. Something serious was unfolding right before him, and the quiet warning on a slip of paper had suddenly shifted the balance of power at the table. Vanessa laughed softly, oblivious to the silent exchange, her attention focused elsewhere. But James no longer saw her as the charming fiancée. He saw her as a figure cloaked in subtle deception, someone whose actions might hide intentions that could threaten everything he had built. His instincts, honed over decades of navigating business and personal dealings, screamed that Emily's note was not a prank. It was a warning, a lifeline extended in the middle of a seemingly ordinary evening. Emily moved away, her hands steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. She continued her work, serving other tables, but her mind remained on James and the note. She hoped, silently, that he would understand the gravity of the message and take the necessary action. Meanwhile, James folded the note carefully, sliding it into his pocket, and continued his meal with a calm exterior that masked the storm brewing within. In the quiet corner of the restaurant, amid the clinking of glasses and murmured conversations, a drama of subtle gestures and hidden intentions had begun to unfold. James, aware that the night had taken a turn he could not yet fully understand, resolved to observe, to protect, and to act if necessary. And Emily, having played her small yet crucial part, watched from a distance, knowing that sometimes courage was quiet, invisible, and yet powerful enough to change the course of someone's life. The night stretched on, each course arriving with careful precision, each movement charged with tension that only James seemed to sense fully. The city outside continued its noisy dance of life, unaware that within one of its elegant restaurants, a silent warning had been issued, and the first step in a story of deception, courage, and revelation had already begun. After slipping the note onto James's table, Emily returned to the other tables with a calm exterior, hiding the nervous flutter in her chest. Every step she took, every smile she gave, was carefully measured so that no one would suspect she had done something extraordinary. She had only a brief moment to act, but instinct told her it was enough. James's sharp mind, she believed, would recognize the warning for what it was. James sat back in his chair, the note now tucked safely into his pocket. His eyes scanned the restaurant as though seeing it for the first time. Everything seemed normal, soft music playing in the background, the gentle murmur of conversations, and the polished elegance of the staff moving about. But James knew that appearances were often deceiving. He had spent decades reading people, learning to notice the smallest cracks in their behavior, the subtle hints that betrayed intentions. And tonight, something was definitely wrong. He watched Vanessa carefully. She continued to smile and talk, but there was a stiffness to her movements that seemed out of place. Her laughter, though light and melodic, lacked spontaneity, and her eyes, when they met his, didn't carry the warmth he remembered from their earlier days. He noticed how she shifted slightly whenever she thought he wasn't looking, how her hand would briefly move under the table, almost as if she were hiding something. Each movement made James's instincts tighten like a coiled spring. Emily, meanwhile, moved among the tables, serving wine and taking orders with practiced ease. She could feel James's eyes on her occasionally, a quiet acknowledgement that he had seen her small gesture. There was no way to speak openly about it, not here in the middle of the restaurant, but a subtle understanding passed between them. Emily felt a mixture of fear and hope. Fear because she had just inserted herself into the life of a billionaire, and hope because she believed that her small act could prevent something terrible from happening. James excused himself under the pretense of checking a business call. He stepped into a quiet corner of the restaurant, where the soft hum of the city outside reached him through the large glass windows. He pulled the note from his pocket and read it again, his brow furrowing. "Your fiancée set a trap. Leave now." The words were simple, but the weight behind them was heavy. He could not ignore it. He knew Vanessa well enough to understand that if there was even a shred of truth in the warning, it was serious. He took a slow breath, trying to clear his mind. He had been in situations before where trust had been broken, but this felt different. It wasn't about business or money, it was personal. He recalled small moments from the past few months that had seemed insignificant at the time. A sudden insistence on secrecy, a question about his private accounts, a request to review documents that had nothing to do with their wedding plans. Alone, these details seemed trivial. But now, in the quiet corner of the restaurant, they formed a troubling pattern. James decided to remain calm and collected. Panicking would solve nothing, and he needed to observe carefully. He returned to the table with a calm smile, as though nothing had changed, and continued the dinner. Vanessa looked at him expectantly, clearly unaware that he had read the note and was now considering the possibility of betrayal. Her smile was bright, her laughter measured, but James's mind was sharp and alert. Every word she spoke, every gesture was now under scrutiny. As the main course was served, James noticed Vanessa reaching subtly for her phone. She typed quickly, her fingers moving with deliberate care, as if she were sending messages that needed to disappear immediately. James's intuition told him this was not casual communication. He had learned to read body language, to notice tension in hands, eyes, and posture. Vanessa's movements screamed caution, and caution in the wrong person, he thought, could signal something dangerous. Emily, from her side of the restaurant, couldn't help but glance occasionally at the table. She felt a quiet tension building, as though time itself had slowed around them. Her eyes caught a brief exchange between Vanessa and another waiter, stationed near the kitchen, who seemed to nod subtly in response to something Vanessa had done. Emily's heart raced. She knew that she had done her part by giving James the note, but what followed now depended entirely on his actions. She tried to remain composed, serving other customers with practiced politeness while keeping her senses alert. James subtly excused himself again, this time claiming he needed to use the restroom. He moved carefully, observing Vanessa as she remained seated, her posture perfect, her attention momentarily distracted by her phone. Once in the restroom, he called his private security team. The call was discreet, barely audible over the running water, but the message was clear. Observe and report unusual activity without alerting anyone. Returning to the table, James maintained a calm demeanor, engaging Vanessa in conversation about trivial matters, the city, the menu, the ambience. Yet internally, his mind raced. Every detail now mattered. The way her hand trembled slightly when she held her glass, the way she seemed to check for hidden glances from the other staff, the subtle but calculated gestures that had likely gone unnoticed by everyone else in the restaurant. Emily watched silently as James returned. She noticed the subtle shift in his posture, the way he seemed slightly more alert, more attentive to details. She knew he had read the note, and she hoped he understood the seriousness. There was no way for her to intervene directly, no way to explain the danger without risking her job, or worse. But she trusted that James's instincts, honed by years of navigating high-stakes situations, would guide him correctly. The meal progressed slowly, each course bringing more tension than satisfaction. James observed Vanessa, calculating every possibility. Was she attempting a financial scam? Was there a social trap meant to embarrass or manipulate him? Each thought ran through his mind, yet he remained outwardly composed. Vanessa, blissfully unaware of the scrutiny she was under, continued to play her role flawlessly, smiling and speaking with practiced charm. But James's focus sharpened with each passing moment. Emily's role in the unfolding events remained invisible to most. To the casual observer, she was just another waitress, moving quietly and efficiently among the tables. Yet in her hands rested the quiet power of a single, courageous act. By trusting her instincts, she had potentially prevented a situation that could have cost James more than money. She could not know the full extent of what Vanessa might have been planning, but she felt a sense of quiet satisfaction, a knowing that she had done the right thing. As the evening drew on, James continued to monitor the subtle cues around him. The atmosphere of the restaurant, once comforting and elegant, now seemed charged with silent tension. Every glance, every gesture, every whispered exchange took on a new significance. James knew that the evening was far from over, and that the real test of character and courage was only beginning. Finally, as the dessert plates were cleared, James made a silent decision. He would not act impulsively, but he would remain vigilant, observing Vanessa until he had clear evidence of her intentions. Emily, continuing her duties with quiet efficiency, felt a sense of relief that he seemed aware that the note had achieved its purpose. The rest of the evening passed in a tense rhythm, each moment a delicate balance between normalcy and suspicion, as James prepared to navigate the unfolding situation with the sharp instincts that had guided him throughout his life. The city outside continued to glow, indifferent to the silent drama unfolding inside the elegant restaurant. The soft hum of conversation and clinking of glasses masked the invisible tension at the corner table, where a billionaire had received a warning, and a young waitress had taken a brave, unseen step. In that quiet space, a story of trust, deception, and courage was beginning to unfold, and the first threads of a complex and dangerous situation were being carefully woven. After the dinner, James excused himself once again, but this time he had no intention of returning. Immediately, he walked slowly toward a quiet corner of the restaurant, keeping his movements casual so as not to alert Vanessa. His mind was racing. Every small gesture, every slight hesitation in Vanessa's behavior earlier in the evening now felt like a clue. He had learned long ago that people often revealed their true intentions through the tiniest signs, glances, movements, even the way they spoke. Tonight, all of those signs were pointing to something troubling. James took out his phone and sent a discreet message to his private security team. Monitor activity around Vanessa tonight. Observe anyone she contacts. Keep this quiet. His words were careful, professional, but carried an urgency that was unmistakable. Over the years, James had built not only a fortune, but also a reputation for being cautious and precise. He knew that in moments like these, patience and careful observation could be more valuable than any confrontation. Returning to his table, James continued to engage Vanessa with a calm and pleasant demeanor. She seemed unaware that he had read the note, or that his mind was already working to uncover the truth. She laughed lightly at his comments, but he noticed the subtle tension in her posture, the way her eyes darted toward the restaurant's entrance and the staff with quiet calculation. James's instincts told him that Vanessa was attempting to manipulate the situation for her benefit, though the details were still unclear. Emily, meanwhile, moved quietly among the tables, her attention divided between her duties and her concern for James. She kept her distance but watched carefully, ready to intervene again if necessary. Her mind replayed the moments she had observed earlier, the subtle signals Vanessa had made, the way she had signaled another waiter, and the quiet nervousness in her hands. Emily knew she had done her part by giving James the warning, but the outcome now depended on his actions. She could only hope he would be careful. As the evening continued, James noticed a waiter, stationed near the kitchen, subtly exchanging a nod with Vanessa. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but to James, trained to notice such things, it was significant. He realized that Vanessa might not be acting alone, and that the carefully crafted facade she maintained could involve others, quietly executing a plan he had yet to understand fully. James decided to act cautiously. He continued to converse with Vanessa, asking neutral questions and observing her reactions. When she answered, he listened not only to her words but also to the pauses, the hesitations, and the inflections in her voice. Each answer, each gesture, provided pieces of a puzzle he was determined to solve. He noticed that Vanessa's phone remained on the table, but she used it discreetly, her fingers moving quickly as if she were hiding messages. Emily, from across the room, noticed James's subtle shifts in attention. She realized he was becoming more alert, more aware, and she felt a quiet relief. The note had worked. It had made him pause and observe. But Emily also knew that the danger was far from over. Vanessa's careful planning suggested that if James did not act wisely, the consequences could be severe. Her heart raced as she served other customers, silently wishing him luck and safety. After the dinner plates were cleared, James excused himself again, this time under the pretext of needing a moment to make a private call. He stepped into a small, quiet office area behind the restaurant, where the lights were dim and the hum of activity from the main dining room was softened. Pulling out his phone, he contacted his security team and asked them to discreetly check the restaurant's surveillance cameras. He wanted to observe Vanessa's interactions from a different perspective, to see if there were patterns or behaviors that he might have missed while at the table. Watching the footage, James's suspicions began to solidify. Vanessa had been sending discreet signals to the waiter near the kitchen, and there were brief moments when she appeared to communicate with someone outside the restaurant, though it was unclear who. The more James observed, the more he realized that this was not a simple misunderstanding or a moment of nervousness. There was deliberate planning behind her actions. James returned to the table with renewed composure. He maintained a pleasant conversation, masking his concern with polite attentiveness. Vanessa continued her facade of charm and elegance, but to James, her behavior now seemed calculated, almost mechanical. He noted the way she adjusted her posture when she thought no one was watching, the careful control of her expressions, and the subtle manipulation of the environment around her. It became clear that she had intended to gain some advantage, though he did not yet know the full extent of her plan. Emily continued to observe from a distance, her intuition confirming what James was beginning to understand. She realized that Vanessa's intentions were likely serious and potentially harmful, and she silently admired James's patience and caution. He had taken the warning seriously, and now he was methodically gathering information before making any moves. Emily felt a quiet pride in having provided the first alert, knowing that her careful observation had initiated a chain of events that could prevent harm. As the evening drew on, James subtly shifted his attention to the people around the restaurant. He noticed subtle interactions between Vanessa and a few other patrons, as well as the staff who seemed to be involved in her quiet communications. He began to piece together a timeline, using his analytical skills to identify moments of potential deception and manipulation. Each observation reinforced his belief that Vanessa's intentions were not aligned with honesty or loyalty. At one point, James excused himself briefly to the restroom again, a strategy to create small breaks in the evening and to continue observing Vanessa's behavior from different angles. He noticed that she occasionally glanced at her phone with a mixture of anxiety and calculation, confirming that she was actively coordinating something. James's experience in business and personal matters allowed him to remain calm under pressure, and he carefully formulated a plan to gather further evidence without confrontation. Back at the table, James maintained the illusion of normalcy. He complimented the restaurant's service and food, asked questions about Vanessa's day, and engaged in light conversation. Yet beneath this polite exterior, he was fully alert, processing every detail. Vanessa, confident in her control over the evening, seemed unaware that her actions were being quietly scrutinized. Her carefully constructed world of appearances was beginning to unravel in ways she could not perceive. Emily, continuing her duties, felt a growing tension in the air. She knew that the evening's events were reaching a critical point. Her role, though small and seemingly insignificant, had set the stage for James to act wisely. She hoped that he would remain cautious and use the information he was gathering to make the right decisions. The quiet bravery she had shown by delivering the note had now given James the opportunity to see the truth before it was too late. Finally, after the main dining hours had passed, James took a moment to step outside. The cool evening air brushed against his face as he reflected on the night's events. He realized that Vanessa had planned a trap, though the specifics were still unclear. He knew that patience, observation, and strategic thinking were his best tools. Meanwhile, Emily continued to work inside the restaurant, her heart quietly aligned with the hope that James's instincts and intelligence would guide him safely through the unfolding situation. James returned to the table one last time before leaving the restaurant, maintaining his calm and composed demeanor. He knew that he had enough information to begin planning his next moves carefully. Vanessa continued her polite conversation, unaware that her carefully orchestrated plans were now under scrutiny. Emily, discreetly watching from her station, felt a quiet satisfaction that her instincts had been correct and that James was taking the warning seriously. The night ended with a sense of quiet tension, a story unfolding silently between the billionaire, his fiancée, and the courageous waitress who had chosen to act on instinct. James had begun to see the outlines of the trap set before him, and Emily's small but decisive action had set the stage for uncovering the truth. In the quiet of the restaurant, a drama of trust, suspicion, and courage was continuing to unfold, and the next steps would determine how far the deception went and whether it could be stopped before causing harm. By the time the dessert plates had been cleared, the restaurant had grown quieter. The soft glow of the overhead lights reflected gently on the polished tables, and the hum of conversations had thinned to murmurs. James sat back in his chair, his expression calm, almost serene, but his mind was sharp and calculating. He had spent the evening observing Vanessa closely, analyzing every glance, every movement, every word. And now he was certain of one thing: Vanessa's intentions were not what they seemed. He watched her as she laughed lightly at a joke she had made herself. Her charm and beauty had once felt comforting to him, but now they carried a sense of calculation, as though each expression was measured, each gesture deliberate. James's instincts, honed over decades of navigating business negotiations and personal dealings, screamed caution. The note from Emily had been the spark, but his own observations had confirmed the warning. He was ready to confront the truth. James cleared his throat gently, drawing Vanessa's attention. She turned to him, smiling, her eyes bright, completely unaware of the thoughts racing through his mind. "Vanessa," he said softly, "there's something I need to discuss with you." Her smile faltered for the briefest moment, a flicker that passed quickly but did not escape James's notice. "Of course, James," she replied, her tone steady, though a shadow of tension touched her voice. "I've noticed some unusual behavior tonight," James began, keeping his voice calm, measured. "Certain actions, certain gestures and communications that don't quite make sense. I need to understand what's happening." Vanessa's eyes widened slightly, but she quickly masked her surprise. "I'm not sure what you mean," she said, her voice steady, though her fingers drummed lightly on the table in a subtle display of nervousness. James leaned in slightly, his gaze fixed firmly on her. "Vanessa, I trust you, but I also need honesty. There have been signals, small ones, that suggest this evening might not be what it appears. I want you to tell me the truth." For a brief moment, Vanessa's facade wavered. James noticed the quick glance she gave toward the waiter near the kitchen, the silent signal that had been part of her plan all along. It was almost imperceptible, but James had seen it. His mind raced as he pieced together the puzzle. The messages under the table, the signals to staff, the subtle distractions meant to keep him unaware. I don't know what you're implying," Vanessa said, her voice slightly higher than before, a faint tremor betraying the calm she tried to project. James's tone softened slightly, though his eyes remained steady. "Vanessa, I've observed enough to know that something has been planned tonight, something that could have serious consequences. I need to know why and who is involved." The tension at the table grew thick. Vanessa's carefully crafted plan, which had relied on subtlety and deception, was unraveling under James's calm but sharp scrutiny. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that her gestures, signals, and small manipulations had been noticed, not just noticed but understood. Emily, standing a short distance away while clearing nearby tables, watched quietly, her heart pounding. She knew that the moment of confrontation had arrived. Her small action earlier in the evening, the slip of a note, had set the stage, but now James was in control. She remained calm, ready to continue her duties, but aware that the situation had escalated far beyond ordinary observation. Vanessa's composure cracked just slightly. Her eyes darted toward the door, as if considering escape, and then back to James. I thought I could help," she stammered. "I wanted to protect our future. I didn't mean any harm." James's expression softened just a fraction, but his resolve remained firm. "Vanessa, this isn't protection. The actions I've observed tonight suggest manipulation, coordination, and deception. I need full honesty. Who else is involved? What exactly were you planning?" She hesitated, caught between the desire to maintain control and the reality of the evidence against her. James noticed the shift, the subtle signs of guilt and fear that betrayed her calm exterior. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't meant to be harmful to you. I thought if I could manage certain financial matters, it would secure us, our life together. But it seems I miscalculated." James listened carefully, taking in every word, every nuance. He realized that Vanessa's plan, while intended to benefit her, had been deceitful and manipulative. He also recognized that she had underestimated his awareness, his intelligence, and the subtle but powerful intervention of someone outside their immediate circle, Emily. "I see," James said finally, his voice calm though firm. "Vanessa, I need to be very clear. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, personal or professional. What I observed tonight breaks that trust. You can explain, but actions have consequences." Vanessa's eyes welled slightly with tears. She had relied on charm, subtlety, and distraction, but James had dismantled each piece of her plan without confrontation, relying instead on observation and calm logic. She realized that the facade she had maintained for months, maybe even years, was now gone, leaving her vulnerable in a way she hadn't anticipated. At that moment, James noticed the small gestures he had been observing throughout the evening. The subtle nods, the signals, the coordination with the waiter were now meaningless, exposed, and powerless. His composure and careful observation had revealed the truth without chaos, without drama, and without risk to himself. Emily continued to work in the background, her quiet presence unnoticed but crucial. She felt a mixture of relief and pride. Her instincts had guided her to act. Her small act had reached James, and now the situation was being handled with intelligence and care. She knew that her role, though quiet and unseen by most, had been significant. James leaned back slightly, maintaining a calm exterior, and allowed the weight of the conversation to settle. "Vanessa, this relationship cannot continue under these circumstances," he said finally. "I need honesty, integrity, and transparency. Without those, there is no foundation. I cannot trust a future built on manipulation." Vanessa lowered her gaze, the reality of her situation sinking in. The charm, elegance, and control she had relied on were gone, replaced by the quiet power of truth revealed. She realized that James's awareness, intelligence, and calm observation had prevented a situation that could have been much worse. The remainder of the evening passed with quiet acknowledgement. James continued to engage with Vanessa politely, but the warmth and intimacy that had once characterized their interactions were gone. The conversation remained civil, but the distance was clear. Vanessa's carefully constructed plans were dismantled, and James had navigated the situation with skill, patience, and careful observation. Emily's role remained discreet. She continued her duties, but her mind replayed the events of the evening. She realized that courage did not always require confrontation. Sometimes, a small, thoughtful act, like a simple note, could shift the course of events, giving someone the opportunity to act wisely and prevent harm. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that her instincts had guided her correctly, and that her intervention had contributed to a safer, more honest resolution. By the time the restaurant began closing for the night, James had quietly made arrangements to ensure that Vanessa's actions would not cause further complications. He had spoken with his security team, reviewed surveillance, and documented the evening carefully. Every step he took was methodical, deliberate, and measured, ensuring that truth and safety were preserved without unnecessary confrontation or drama. Vanessa left the restaurant quietly, her plan exposed, her intentions revealed, and her understanding of the consequences clear. James remained at the table for a few moments longer, reflecting on the evening's events. He felt gratitude toward Emily, whose small but courageous act had alerted him to the danger before it escalated. Her intuition and bravery had made a significant difference, allowing him to navigate the situation with clarity and control. As James finally left the restaurant, the cool night air brushing against his face, he felt a renewed sense of caution and awareness. The events of the evening had been a reminder of the importance of observation, intuition, and careful judgment. He knew that trust must be earned, and that even those closest to us may sometimes have hidden intentions. But he also recognized the power of courage and honesty, even in small acts, to prevent harm and guide decisions wisely. In the quiet of the night, Emily cleaned up the remaining tables, unaware that her small gesture, the slip of a note, had altered the course of someone's life. She reflected on the events, realizing that bravery often comes quietly, without recognition, yet with the power to make a real difference. The evening had been a lesson in observation, caution, and courage, a lesson that James and Emily both understood, though in different ways. The city streets outside glowed under the soft light of the evening, their reflections shimmering in the puddles left from a brief afternoon. Rain. The restaurants and shops were beginning to close, and the usual hum of traffic had slowed to a quieter rhythm. For James Ellsworth, the night was far from over, though the tension inside the elegant restaurant had dissolved. He had left Vanessa behind, her intentions exposed and plans unraveled, but the weight of the evening lingered in his thoughts. As he walked down the quiet sidewalk, James reflected on the events of the night. The warning note, slipped to him by a young waitress, had been a turning point. It had given him the opportunity to see the situation clearly, to observe Vanessa's behavior, and to act with patience and intelligence rather than impulsiveness. He realized that small acts of courage, like Emily's, could sometimes have far-reaching consequences, shaping outcomes in ways that no one could anticipate. Back inside the restaurant, Emily was finishing her shift. She moved quietly, collecting the last of the dishes and straightening the tables. The soft lighting cast long shadows across the polished floor, and for a moment she allowed herself a quiet breath, thinking about the unusual events of the evening. She had acted on instinct, a simple note delivered without expectation of recognition, yet the impact had been profound. Her mind wandered to James, hoping he had understood the gravity of her message and would take it seriously. James had indeed understood. He had navigated the confrontation with Vanessa carefully, using calm observation and tact rather than anger. By doing so, he had exposed her manipulations, ensured that no further harm could come from her plan, and preserved the dignity of the evening. He had maintained control, not through confrontation alone, but through intelligence, patience, and a careful assessment of the situation. In doing so, he had avoided unnecessary chaos while still addressing the deception fully. Emily, as she moved through the emptying restaurant, thought about trust. It was a concept she had often considered in her personal life, but tonight she had seen it play out in a much larger, more consequential way. Trust, she realized, was fragile and could be influenced by actions both visible and invisible. Her small gesture, delivering a discreet note, had been an act of trust in James, and it had allowed him to act wisely. In a way, it reminded her that courage often worked best when combined with awareness and discretion. Meanwhile, James returned to his private residence, a modern penthouse with a view of the skyline. The city stretched below him, a web of lights and streets, each carrying countless stories of ambition, hope, and human complexity. He thought about Vanessa, the choices she had made, and the consequences that had followed. While he felt a sense of disappointment and loss, he also recognized the clarity that the evening had brought. Relationships, whether personal or professional, required honesty, integrity, and transparency. Without those, there could be no true connection. James spent the next few hours reviewing the details of the evening, speaking with his security team, and ensuring that all necessary precautions had been taken. He wanted to make sure that Vanessa's actions would not cause further complications, that any potential risks had been mitigated, and that the truth of the situation had been documented carefully. His approach was thorough but measured, a reflection of the discipline and caution that had guided him throughout his life. Emily, finishing her shift, stepped outside into the cool night air. The streets were quieter now, the energy of the day replaced by a calm stillness. She walked slowly, reflecting on the events that had unfolded. She realized that her small act of courage had made a real difference, and though she remained largely unknown in the story that had just taken place, she felt a quiet pride. Her instincts had guided her correctly, and she had helped prevent a situation that could have been far more damaging. In the days that followed, James made the decision to end his engagement with Vanessa. He did so quietly, with no public drama, choosing instead to focus on integrity and clarity. He recognized that trust, once broken, could not be easily repaired, and that a future built on manipulation and deception was not worth pursuing. The decision, while difficult on a personal level, reflected his commitment to honesty and his respect for himself. Emily returned to her routine at the restaurant, her life continuing with a sense of normalcy. Yet the events of that evening had left an impression on her, a quiet reminder of the power of observation, intuition, and action. She had acted without expectation, with no desire for recognition or reward, and yet her actions had played a critical role in guiding someone important safely through a delicate situation. It was a lesson in the value of courage, even when it was small and unseen. For James, the experience was also a lesson in humility and gratitude. He had been reminded that even in a world of wealth and influence, the actions of ordinary people could have extraordinary impact. Emily's discreet bravery had given him the opportunity to act wisely, to see the truth, and to respond with patience and clarity. It was a reminder that life's most important lessons often came from unexpected places, and that awareness and attentiveness could be just as crucial as strength or power. In the weeks that followed, James continued to reflect on the night and its lessons. He realized that while wealth and success could provide many advantages, they could never replace the need for discernment, intuition, and moral judgment. Trust, honesty, and careful observation were essential not only in relationships but in every aspect of life. And he remained quietly grateful for the young waitress who had acted courageously when the situation demanded it. Emily, too, carried the memory of that night with her, a reminder that her instincts mattered, and that even small acts could influence events in significant ways. She felt a renewed sense of confidence in her ability to act when necessary, and a deeper understanding of how awareness and courage could intersect to create meaningful outcomes. Her quiet heroism, though largely unseen by the world, had left a lasting impact on someone's life, and that realization brought her a sense of fulfillment. James eventually returned to his daily routines, his life continuing with business meetings, philanthropic work, and personal reflection. Yet he approached relationships and interactions with a heightened awareness, a sharper intuition, and a renewed commitment to honesty. The evening at the restaurant had been a turning point, a moment when observation, courage, and careful judgment had prevented potential harm and illuminated the importance of truth. In the end, the story of that night became a quiet legend among the staff of the restaurant. Emily's actions, though mostly unknown to the public, were remembered privately by those who had witnessed her courage. James's response, measured and calm, reflected the importance of patience, intelligence, and discernment. The events had unfolded without chaos or dramatic confrontation, yet the lessons were profound. Trust must be earned, courage can appear in small acts, and awareness can prevent harm before it occurs. As the city continued its steady rhythm, life went on. People moved through the streets, unaware of the silent drama that had taken place in the corner of an elegant restaurant. Yet for James and Emily, the events of that night had left a lasting impression. It was a story of vigilance, courage, and integrity, a story that reminded them both of the power of careful observation, the importance of honesty, and the quiet impact of one person's brave decision. Ultimately, James looked forward to the future with a renewed sense of clarity. He understood that while challenges and risks were inevitable, the ability to observe, reflect, and act wisely could guide him safely through life's complexities. Emily returned to her everyday world, confident in the knowledge that even quiet actions could have extraordinary consequences. Together, though their paths rarely crossed again, their brief intersection had created a story of courage, insight, and resolution that neither would forget. The night had ended, the danger had passed, and the lessons had been learned. Trust, vigilance, and quiet bravery had proven their worth. And in the quiet of the city, under the glow of distant lights, a story of integrity, courage, and careful judgment had quietly concluded, leaving both James and Emily with a deeper understanding of the power of observation, honesty, and moral clarity.